Hi, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the next section in the Gordon-West manual, which is on call signs. So we're going to be looking at call signs. And you're probably wondering, what in the world is a call sign? Well, a call sign is basically your ham radio name. It's a unique set of letters and numbers that are combined together, and that combination is what identifies who you are on ham radio. So let me give you a little example to understand a little better. My call sign, or my ham radio name, is KD2EOM. I'm the only person on the planet with the call sign KD2EOM, and that's my ham radio name. So whenever people hear KD2EOM on the radio, they know that it's me. Every ham on the planet has a different call sign. No two people have the same call sign. Every call sign is unique to a specific person. So based on your call sign, everyone on ham radio will know who you are, and that's how you identify yourself on ham radio. And an interesting tidbit here is after you contact someone on ham radio, a common practice is to send people a postcard in the mail with your call sign on it and your other info, like your address, as proof that they talked to you. So for example, this is my postcard, or we call it a QSL card, we say. So you can see up here it says KD2EOM, that's my call sign, and on the back there's some info. You have my town where I'm located, and usually people also put their address and other identifying information. Now, when you begin a contact with someone on ham radio, you should always identify yourself by saying your call sign on the air so that the person you're talking to and anyone listening to your conversation knows exactly who you are. Technically, that's not required by the FCC rules, but it's still good practice, obviously. Just as you would explain to someone what your name is when you begin a conversation with them, when you're starting a conversation with someone on ham radio, you should always give your call sign. Now, FCC rules do require essentially that when you're in the middle of a contact with another ham while you're talking with someone on ham radio, you're required to transmit your call sign on the air every 10 minutes, and that's a very important number. Is that on the board? Maybe not. And anyway, it is on the board. So you see every 10 minutes, you're supposed to identify with your call sign every 10 minutes. And that way, new people who stumble onto your frequency or the place on the radio where you're talking, and when they start listening to your conversation in the middle, they'll know who you are as well as the person you're talking to. And FCC rules also require you to transmit your call sign at the end of your contact. At the end of your transmission with that person, you should identify by saying your call sign. And you should write that all down because that's very important. Not only is it on the test, but you're going to be asked to do that every day when you're operating on ham radio. So you always have to use your call sign to identify yourself on ham radio. And whenever you make a transmission on the radio, this is always true. It doesn't matter if you're only making a short transmission for like 1 little second just to test something out and make sure your radio's working, or if you're using very low power and no one can hear you anyway, or even if you just transmit silence, if you hold down the microphone and don't say anything, and you're not saying anything, it doesn't matter. FCC rules require that whenever you transmit, you identify yourself with your call sign. So you have to say it you should say it at the beginning of the contact, and you have to say it every 10 minutes during a contact, and you have to say it at the end of your transmission. So even if you're not in a contact but you're transmitting anyway, maybe just to test your radio's working, just say KD2UM testing or something like that. The point is you always have to identify yourself and make sure people know who you are. Now, there is only one exception to this, and that exception is when you are controlling model craft. So what exactly does that mean? Well, it turns out you can use ham radio to control model cars, boats, or aircraft. It's actually possible to do this with ham radio. And in those circumstances, you don't have to include your call sign in your transmissions. But even then, you do have to identify in some other way. You have to put a label on your transmitter, and the label has to have your name, your call sign, and your address. And that's actually very important to note, even if you're not planning to control model craft like that with your ham radio. There are test questions asking about that, so you should write this down in your notebook as well. And another thing you'll also want to write down while you're at it is the maximum power level you can use to control model craft, because the FCC actually tests about this as well on your exam. You can only use 1 watt to control model craft, 1 watt. So your transmitter can't transmit a signal with more than 1 watt of power. A signal with 2 watts of power to control model craft is illegal. And that's pretty easy to remember, but make sure you write it down in order to recall it. An easy way to remember this is sort of a simple answer. 1 watt is just the number 1. That's a very simple number. So just remember the number 1 and you'll remember it's 1 watt. So just to note though, this is only the power level for controlling model craft. Other power levels are different, and we're going to talk to that later. So we've talked so far about identifying yourself with your call sign on ham radio, but we haven't talked much about the actual call sign. As I said, the call sign's a combination of letters and numbers that is unique to you. My call sign's KD2EOM. The test may present you with a list of call signs and ask you which of them is a valid US ham radio call sign. What do I mean by that? Well, All you need to know for the test is that ham radio call signs in the United States always begin with either the letters A, K, N, or W. They always have only one number in the middle, and they always have at least one letter at the end. And I've written this up on the board, so you should write this down. So KD2EOM is a valid call sign because it starts with K, it has one number in the middle, the number 2, and it has 3 letters at the end, the letters EOM. So another weird call sign like KMA3505, that's not a United States call sign. It has more than one number, it has no letters at the end. Neither is a call sign like KDKA, that has no number at all. Or other call signs such as that. You have to have it start with A, K, N, or W, one number in the middle, and one letter at the end. So definitely write all that down for the test. Now, normally when you get a call sign, the FCC just they give you a random batch of these numbers and letters. Or what I mean by that is you don't get to choose what combinations of letters and numbers you get. For example, when I got my call sign, I didn't choose to get the call sign KD2EOM. That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't stand for anything. That's just a call sign that they gave me. It's a little random. So if you don't like the fact that you don't get to choose your call sign and you're just handed a random jumble of letters and numbers, I have some good news for you. The FCC has what they call a vanity call sign program. And the vanity call sign program allows you to create your own call sign. For example, if your name is Bob, you can make your call sign K1BOB or WA9BOB or whatever you want. Any licensed amateur actually can apply for a vanity call sign in this way. You don't have to be a general or extra class license. You can be a technician. You don't have to even have to have been licensed for a long time. You can get a vanity call sign even as a newly licensed technician. A special note though, you can only apply for this vanity call sign after you already have a normal call sign. So when you first get your license after passing the exam, you are going to get a random call sign assigned from the FCC. But after that, you can change it if you wish. Now, obviously, there are some restrictions to this. Obviously, the call sign can't already be taken because only one person can have a specific call sign. And it turns out there are other restrictions specifically for technician class licenses. You see, if you'll notice from these rules, not all call signs are necessarily the same length. Some of them are shorter than others. And it turns out the shorter call signs with fewer characters are reserved for upperclassmen or general or extra class licensees, since there aren't a lot of these short call signs to go around, since because they're short, there are less possible combinations you can make. So let's look at a possible question about this that you could run into on your technician exam. It reads, which of the following is a vanity call sign which a technician class amateur operator might select if available? And I'm going to put this question up on the screen. So we have choice A, K1XXX, B, KA1X, C, W1XX, or D, all of these choices are correct. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you the answer to this question and explain the answer. The answer is choice A, K1XXX. So if you look at all these 3 or 4 choices, they're all valid call signs. They all start with A, K, N, or W. They all have one number and end with at least one letter. But remember, shorter vanity call signs are reserved for general and extra class licenses, not technician class. Technicians can only apply to get the longer call signs. So there's a special trick to remember with this question, which is an actual question you can run up against on the test. Note that option A is the longest call sign out of all the choices. And this is a really handy trick. In all of the questions that ask which vanity call sign a technician can get, the answer will always be the choice with the longest call sign. So if you count the number of characters, option A has 5 characters. The other options only have 4. So option A is the longest, and it's the answer. So now let's look at the rules for US call signs again one more time, and we're going to make a little observation. Again, they must start with A, K, N, or W, have one number, and end with at least one letter. So if you think about it, what's the shortest call sign you can create while still conforming to these rules? Well, the shortest call sign you can possibly make with these rules is a call sign that has only one letter in front, one number, and only one letter at the end. So a 3-digit call sign like, say, K1A or W2N. And it turns out that these super short call signs are very special, and they're used by what we call special event stations. So what's a special event station? Sometimes people operate on ham radio to celebrate certain special events or raise awareness of them. For example, I once operated at an art festival or a chalk festival which featured famous chalk artists in order to let people know that the chalk festival was happening in our area. And these special event stations are actually very popular. Almost every ham on ham radio wants to make contact with these special event stations. So these special event stations get the special 1-by-1 call signs, meaning one letter, one number, one letter. And whenever you see a call sign with a one-letter prefix and a one-letter suffix, you can know that it's a special event call sign. And this might seem like a random, useless piece of info, but there are test questions on it, so you should know it. And a good way to remember special event call signs is that if you look at the one-by-one call signs, the one-by-one call signs are special because they're the shortest possible call signs you can make. They're special call signs, and these special call signs are used for special event stations. That's an easy way to remember it. So let's move on to another aspect of call signs, and that's saying your call sign on the air. Well, at first this might seem pretty simple. You just say your letters and the numbers of your call sign. Say, I'm KD2EOM. How can it be any more complicated than that? But it turns out it is more complicated. And we can look at sort of an analogy here. Have you ever played the game telephone with someone as a small child? You probably have. And you're whispering in someone else's ear. And what happens is they can't hear you very well. And eventually, as the message that you're transmitting, or the message that you're saying goes around the whole circle of kids, by the time it gets to the end, it gets all messed up because no one can hear each other well. Now, ham radio is sometimes like a giant game of telephone. It can be very hard to say what the other person is saying sometimes. So my call sign again is KD2EOM, but if I just say KD2EOM on the air, it's easy to also hear that as AT2COM. They all almost sound the same, and sometimes on the air they do sound the same. K sounds like A, D sounds like T, and E. That's not going to work. So what are we going to do to make sure other people hear our call signs correctly? So Ham actually came up with a clever solution for this, and it's called the phonetic alphabet. What is the phonetic alphabet, you ask? So the phonetic alphabet is, instead of saying each letter like KD2EOM, you substitute each letter of your call sign with a word. You substitute a word for each letter, and the word that you use is a word that starts with that letter. So if that sounds a little confusing, let me look at an example. So instead of saying KD2EOM, I might say Kilo Delta 2 Echo Oscar Mike. I'm substituting each letter of my call sign with a word that starts with that letter. And by the way, if you're wondering what a kilo is, we're going to get to that later in this course. But this is a good example. There's another example we could use. If your call sign is WB5WBW, you could say on the air, this is Willy Billy 5, Willy Billy Willy. Although it's probably not recommended. I do not recommend saying something like that, as it's so confusing, and that really defeats the purpose of using the phonetic alphabet. So to make it even easier, there's an international phonetic alphabet that has a suggested list of what words to use for each letter. And this is a universally used list around the world. And there's a page in your manual, in this section of your manual, which has a list if you want to look at it after this video lecture. So now we're going to move into what we call signs for club stations. So what is a club station? Well, a ham radio club, there are ham radio clubs, if you didn't know that. There are clubs of people that are into ham radio and they make a club. A ham radio club sometimes has its own call sign. Sometimes there's a station in the club. And whenever club members are at the club and they're operating using the club station, they get to use that club call sign when they're transmitting. So the FCC, it almost treats the club as a person, except it's not a person, it's a club. And any member of the club can use the club call sign while operating at the club. So if you have a ham radio club, you can get a club station license for your club, complete with its own call sign. Now, there's something important to note here, however. There are test questions asking directly about ham radio clubs. And one of the test questions might ask you how many people there have to be in a club in order for the club to be eligible for this club station license and call signs. Now, it turns out that you need to have 4 people in your club in order for it to be considered a club by the FCC and in order for you to get a club station license. And I want you to write that down and memorize it for your test. But I do have a trick for you to memorize that. An easy way to remember this is that there are 4 letters in the word club, C-L-U-B. There are 4 letters in the word club, so you need 4 members in a club in order to get a club license. And if you'd like, you can write that trick down as well. And another thing that the test might ask you about is vanity call signs for clubs. So remember, we just talked about vanity call signs. You get to choose your own call sign, basically. How does that work for club stations? Well, each club station has this person that we call a trustee. And the trustee is basically in charge of the club and its license, because someone has to be in charge of the club license. So he's the person who's trusted to handle the club station license, hence the word trustee, because he's trusted to be in charge of that. And since he's in charge of the club station license, it would make sense that he is the one who can choose the vanity call sign for the club. And this is indeed the case. In a club, only the trustee of the club can choose a vanity call sign for the club. The other members of the club, even if they're club officers or extra class members, they can't do this. Only the trustee can choose a vanity license. So we're almost done with this lecture, but the last thing we're going to talk about today are tactical call signs. What in the world is a tactical call sign? A tactical call sign is almost like a nickname, and it sort of describes what you're doing during an operation. So, for example, if I'm operating at race headquarters of a marathon and I'm using ham radio to keep track of all these people in races, instead of saying that I'm KD2EOM, I'm actually allowed to identify myself as race headquarters or something if I'm at the race headquarters of that race. So that's what a tactical call sign is. Now, I want to make very clear though, you don't always use tactical call signs. You only use them if it makes it easier to keep track of things during some sort of special operation like a marathon or an air show or something. You normally don't use tactical call signs when you're just talking on the air for fun normally, or talking to your buddy across the street, or talking to someone else on ham radio just for fun. Only during operations like maybe dog sled races if you happen to live in Alaska, or air shows or races or something else like that, that's when you use tactical call signs. And you can remember that tactical call signs are only used for operations because of the word tactical. Now, normally in life, the word tactical refers to operations. Usually it means military operations, but in this case, we're talking about other types of operations. But tactical is for operations. Now, a really quick note, when you're using a tactical call sign, you still have to follow the same rules for identifying on the air as you do when you're using a normal call sign. At the end of each communication, every 10 minutes during a communication, you have to give your tactical call sign. That stays the same. Okay, so this section on call signs is really long, so I'm going to cut it short right here. And for the rest of class time, I want you to study a little, and then I'll see you tomorrow and we'll finish this section.